Thank you very much, and good morning to each and every one of you. Appreciate the opportunity that Michael gave me to share some information with you this morning. Someone looked at my name tag and said, well, Rich, it says on there, University of Idaho, are you at the wrong conference? Because I know Michael has a higher ed one, and my response was no. So I want to give you just a real quick, brief background on what I had and why I'm at your conference rather than a higher ed conference. I started out way back when as a math teacher, then worked my way up through the echelon of administration to a vice principal, a principal, assistant sup, and then a superintendent, of which 23 years later I retired as a superintendent, and the University of Idaho came after recruiting me saying, we want a practitioner, Rich, that has had experience out in the field and as an educator teaching graduate students. And so before the ink was dry on my resignation and my retirement papers, I signed with the University of Idaho 3 years ago, so I'm going on year 4 as a graduate faculty member, and my role is facilities and outreach. My minor in my doctoral program is facilities, so gave me a little bit of an edge when I was doing my superintendent work. I look at the idea, since I'm the second to last session speaker, thought I'd reflect back over some of the sessions that we've had, and I congratulate Michael on the conference. I think it's been an excellent conference for the last 2 days. I was looking through from the keynote speaker we had up here on Sunday night, and his main emphasis was do what's best for kids. And so as I build a program helping superintendents assist them in bond passage, which it's interesting because the majority of superintendents only run one bond during their career and have very little experience in bond issues. You people that are in the trenches and the facility side of it are the ones that can help, accentuate the positiveness to get a bond passed. The teaming approach is something that is dire in need, and as Mr. Brewer said, what's best for kids, a staff that's believing in what's being done and that everyone's on the same song sheet. Those are part of the ingredients that I use. This book that I wrote after I retired as superintendent, first thing I did is I said, I'm going to spend a year at the college level. You have plenty of time that you don't out in the schools writing a book. So another guy and I put this book together. It's used all over the U.S. now, teaching graduate level classes. It's something you could look at to see if you have any interest in it, but it contains everything from selecting architects to arranging schedules on not near as extensive as we've heard our speakers, but it's a nice cookbook. It was published last year, and I use it in my graduate level classes, and I know that the publishers said now that it's used in 17 states on a consistent basis in their graduate program. So our main speakers emphasis what's best for kids. Strong connotation to where I say if I'm helping you as a bond issue in a school district, we need to focus on what's best for kids. When I observe bond issues failing across the states, what happens? They get off track and the kids' importance is lost. They focus on finance, they focus on what you forgot, the different pieces come up significantly. So, I thought, that's a good segue into mine. The second was the speakers that we had a panel up here of the 4 larger school district directors that spoke, and my takeaway with theirs was that you need long-range planning. You need to plan out and not be reactionary. That same thing again happens on bonds. If we focus on a bond issue, spur of the moment type of deal, no planning, probably not going to go too far. I've been involved in 65 bond issues during my last 25 years, of which 90% of them have passed, and they've averaged 74% positive passage rate. And the 10-step process that Michael handed out in front of you is a publication that I put into a national publication, Schools and Universities, and it's used in my book as well as all the forms and anything else that I give out on a bond issue. And then I provide a notebook that gives all the ingredients to the ad hoc committees that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. The next piece of seminar talks that they gave yesterday was on hiring the right people. And Brian Busby talked about, importance of hiring people. I think the same thing holds true in our schools. When we have staff that are committed, just like our keynote said, when we have staff and teachers, bus drivers, and the rest of them that say we have a genuine interest in making the school better and positive, our bond issues correlate and do better too. I see a lot of bond issues that I'm not involved with that the staff cause them to fail because they said, I wasn't listened to, I wasn't involved, the solution isn't the right solution, where's my science lab, information, where's my updates, and cause a lot of dissension. So I think that, what he said is holding true with our schools as well. Yesterday afternoon, Roy talked a little bit about successful long-range facilities and bonds, and my takeaway on his talk was you need a plan from A to Z to get you from the start to the end. And he talked about itemizing projects and scheduling things, getting everything pretty much like he said, you don't have anything that you want to hide. On the same token, you want to be upfront and transparent. So his idea fits again in with my 10-step process, saying that the better prepared you are, the better apt you are to be successful in that bond. Part of what we have in Idaho is unique in that Idaho and Kentucky are the only two states now in the whole U.S. that require the antiquated 2/3 majority. So we look at, from that standpoint, saying, okay, one no offsets two yeses. So you got to be very strategic in what you do. And unfortunately in Idaho, 1 out of 4 bond issues pass. My record of 90% of the bond issues that I work on pass only because of the systematic approach that I present and say, here's what we need to follow. If we haven't done these sort of things, probably better delay it. The other one that is nice that I'm able to utilize is my graduate students doing research for me. And I get a kick out of that because they say, I need a project. Okay, here's a project for you to do. So some of the projects I've had them do, which is noted on your sheet, excuse me, is election dates. They did an extensive research database saying, are some dates better than others? Well, I know from talking to a lot of you during the last 2 days, you have a variety of methods that are used. Some of you have a board that, puts it to your county commissioners, and then they make the decision. Others have not elections that you need. So every state has a little bit different nuances there. But what we found out, what these graduate students found out is that more votes doesn't always transform into a higher percent of yeses. And the balloting can be mail-in ballot, can be walk-in ballots. In Idaho, we fought mail-in ballots because my neighboring states, which I work in also, Oregon and Washington, both require 100% mail-in ballots. And I take my process across the line over to Oregon that requires 50%. And we pass with 53%, but same identical process we use in Idaho with walk-in ballots gets 63%. If it fails, but 73 is what we shoot for always in Idaho. So mail-in ballots can have a negative too. Idaho requires a validation, which means that if it's not on general election date, you have to have at least 50% of registered voters submit a ballot. So I've had elections there that we're at 80% yeses, but 46% turnout. So we contact all the no's and try to get them to put a ballot in so that we can validate. And that election date itself, though, in Idaho, we avoid November and we avoid May because of political elections that cast a negative slant on education ballots. And so the research again says, look at that carefully and see who's up for election. And if it's a bitter contested election, for instance, my district where I was had a mayor election, and it was a bitter election from the start to the end. We avoided that date because everyone that was a negative slant on education voted. So the next thing is who votes. The research out there says that 20% of the voting population across the U.S. vote no on every issue for no reason. So it's interesting, again, Idaho, we extract back. Okay, we need 67%, so 20% are going to vote no. That means we got 13% fluctuation to make that bond pass or fail, get us to 67. So as we look around and then the research is done, it's interesting, even in the communities of Idaho. Idaho has a lot of small communities, and the people moving into those communities are very vocal, saying we're moving in there for a reason. We don't want any increased taxes, and even if it's a if it's no increase on the ballot, the levy rate may be the same. Their connotation is yes, but it fails, the levy rate will go down, and they push that strong and hard. So we look at that idea, and again, research says that don't expect a large turnout, that you're going to get carried on because 20% of them are going to vote no. The next piece of research I had them do for me was the idea of yeses. Is there any formula out there that says what we shoot for? And so I put that into my strategies because that research was done quite a few years ago, but it says that you need an early forecast, an early barometer of what it takes to shoot for an election. And the districts that were up here where they have, a large population within their respective communities is tougher than a district with a smaller amount. But if we can get a handle early on the election from the past three, have that occurred, say, okay, we're expecting 100,000 people to vote, and I would say we need 75,000 of those to vote positive to get our 75%. So how do you manage your solution out there with hard data? It isn't any different than what we do in our, as our Mr. Brewer said, they want their math scores up. They know where they're at number-wise. So we look at that, and that's a good barometer to use, saying probably a good connotation saying that, your elections, you've run three, they're probably going to stay pretty consistent with the amount that come out. So use that for your advantage. Another one was research done was what kind of a committee is needed versus not. My process that I started 25 years ago, because I got out of one of my superintendent jobs and went to work for an architect firm, giving me a little break for 7 years, doing all their education work, was the idea of setting up committees, because I would go to a district and the superintendent, being inexperienced, would ask me, Rich, how do you get this thing passed? Is there any guarantee that when you're done with this thing and I pay you a fee, it's going to pass? My response back to him was, Mr. Superintendent, you crossed the water path over there without sinking, and that'll be the guarantee. If you don't sink, the bond I help you run will pass. There's a high probability that a little tiny thing can set them off. I've seen bond issues that's gone very strong, and in the 24th hour, here comes someone out of the sky blue yonder that sends out a flyer that is skeptical of this or that, and that 67% drops to 65, for instance, causing a failure. So that in itself is some validity to it too. The other pieces that we use is looking at it from research is, how about parents? If parents aren't our top prospect of voters, we're probably in trouble. Grandparents, of course, is there. preschool parents, parents that their children are already out of school. But I'll ask the superintendents this, because when I came into this district that I retired from, first thing I did was did a comparison of parents versus registered parents, and I found out 40% of my parents were registered. So I said to myself, probably not real good statistics showing 40% registered when I need 67% passage rate. So the committee that I put together, which was made up of 75, the committee and I worked strong on getting parents registered. We went from 40% over about a year, got it to 75%, and from that day on, I said to myself, as a superintendent, I got to be smarter rather than, because we gained 250 kids a year in there, which was pretty substantial for that smaller school district. I was a border of Boise School District, Meridian being the largest, and then Boise, and then me right beside them. I didn't want that percentage to slip back again and then have to start over. So what I implemented is a process that when the secretaries enroll new students every year, part of their enrollment package was register to vote. So a couple that comes in, we would say to them, would you, along with registering your students, be interested in filling out a registration card, which we can submit for you to be registered. We keep the ball going that way, and the district still does that, and they're at 75 to 80. So 250 new students come in, 500 new parents, 500 people, 450 get registered every year. We keep it up. And what the connotation again in there is, if our parents will vote, and if they're supportive, if our staff are supportive, and then, you people as facility people, part of the secret that I have found is, as Roy said yesterday, is the scope, which is the projects in language that we use, has to be aligned and shown out to the public. The public today, as I said, 20% of the public are skeptical anyway, but if it is clearly delineated to those people out there, the parents get behind it, the staff gets behind it, and I mean all staff. As I work with school districts, I ask the soup, have you talked to your classified staff, your bus drivers, your cooks, your EAs, and others? Their answer is no. We make sure that everyone is involved and educated, because those are the ones that talk out in that community too. And it takes a large effort to make bonds successful. The process that we use, that 10-step process, says, okay, have we done this, this, and this? Are we doing public relations? And people say, well, Rich, I'm going to send out this or that right before the bond. And my answer to them is, no, that really is not the way to do it. We need to be sending out information all the year round. One of our speakers, when we had that panel, they asked them that question is, what do you release? And their response was, as soon as a bond passes, they release information that this is what happened. Well, here's my other philosophy as a superintendent. The patrons out in there that help pay for the schools is the invested, people. So I always use the comment here, we're working strong to protect your assets. Just as you protect your assets at home, your house being upkept, your car being the oil changed, whatnot, that's what we're doing with your patron, ideas out there, and your dollars that you're spending is that we are protecting your interest. When we get ready to run a bond, we say the same thing. This is what's going to happen to increase enrollment. My district had probably some of the nicest facilities in the entire state of Idaho for a 4A level, which means, there's 4A, 5A are the larger districts. And I'd brag to the patrons all the time on that, saying, your support of our community has allowed us to build, a new $51 million high school, allowed us to do this. We have done this with your taxpayer money, and we come back and say, here's what you approved, here's what's done, or left to be done. That is another piece that's very important for public relations, and part of that 10-step process is saying, you promote year-round with facilities. You people as facility directors have a huge impact upon the scope of it. My director of facilities and I work very closely together consistently. We did the review of all the facilities, and then we did an analysis, and we put them on a phase program. If, you know, here's phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, so that the person that said, hey, what happened to this project? The answer was, it's not lost, it's coming. We can't only do so much. And, you know, the other secret that I tell the superintendents is, you can try too much. You can try to say, okay, I'm going to do this once, and everything in the kitchen sink is part of what we're doing. That doesn't go real well with patrons either. They're going to look through that list and say, well, this or this is being done, and is that important? And, you know, some of the other panel people said the same thing, is that what happens when, you know, the squeaky wheel out there comes up and says, you know, add this or that? Well, that really doesn't help us either. And I've seen that happen. Soups say, well, you know, I didn't really want to add this or that, but some patrons, my response is, you know, what constituency does that patron make up? Is that half of your constituencies that vote, or is that just a handful of people, which we all hear about? You as facility directors, I'm sure you're getting a call from someone saying, hey, you know, blah, 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 blah. Well, here's the truth. Usually that's in the small minority of the people out there that are complaining. Maybe we got 2, 3 dozen of them, but on the same token, is that enough because we get one call to add X, Y, Z to the scope, and something else gets forgotten or changed or put on the back burner? And I see that happen a lot too. Part of the other pieces of information that, you know, this textbook talks about is, how do you organize a committee? What's the functions of the committee? The committee, in my mind, in Idaho, and I'm sure your states are similar, the law is pretty explicit, saying you cannot promote as a paid employee of the state. You can inform, but not promote. So we work on that all the time with districts. I say, here's the legal process you can do. Here's what the challengers will challenge you. We have the Idaho Freedom Foundation, which are watchdogs of anything that has to do with taxes. They'll watch a bond issue, and if they feel that someone has done any promoting whatsoever, they'll put a legal challenge out there, especially if it passes, trying to get the courts to rule against it and either dissolve it or say you can't go forward. So promoting is something that I outline in my book as well, saying these are tasks. This is a legal definition of promoting, meaning getting people to say yes. As a superintendent, if I had a hearing that was going on and I was there, the law says that as a superintendent, if I'm on my school time, which the attorneys say as superintendents, and you guys are probably the same as facility directors, we're on 24/7. No one gives us any slack on calling us at 10 o'clock at night. So if we're on duty, and so my advice is to you people as facility people or me as a past superintendent, I say to them, I'm on my own time. I've done my day's work. I'm on my own time. And so if I say anything that sounds promoting in a way, it doesn't represent the school district as an employee. In my 65 bond issues, I've never had either close to being challenged from, you know, the legalities of promoting versus informing. So that, you know, outlining of who's on that committee, the 70-member committee that I had put together right before I retired with my bond had 2 co-chairs, of which were distinguished citizens in the community. What, you know, the research people said again is the makeup of that committee helps you give you an odd on passage. So I got 2 people in the community, a male and a female, so that, you know, I had a nice balance. The co-chairs, the gal was a retired person, the guy was a younger person, so we're balancing out age and genders there. Both of them were very well followed in that community. The 70-some members that were part of that committee went right along with their game plan. Everyone told me, Rich, you know, 51 million, it's going to be a huge task. I'd had a fire of our high school 5-6 years prior to that. It burnt down and we replaced it with insurance funds. You're never going to pass that bond. And I said to them, you know, following the steps we have in this committee, and as Roy said yesterday in his, having that committee well informed, that's why this notebook that I have gives them a nice cookbook, or they could use my textbook, to show them, okay, what's the scope, what's the cost, everything about it, so that when they go out there, along with your staff, remember, staff being well informed, because bus driver every morning, as I say to my bus drivers, you're the one that puts a smile on those little kids' face. You're the one that sets the positive attitude for them, just like our guest, our keynote speaker was talking about, what's best for kids. So that committee, and as I, again, observe elections going on, the average soup says, well, Rich, I got 5 or 6 people put together to pass this thing, and my response was probably overwhelming, because all the tasks that need to be done that are lined up, including registering parents to make sure that, we're at 70–80%, including getting people out to vote yes, whether it's sending in ballots or whether it's going physically to the polls, takes time and effort. So with that, I think that what you see in front of you has some nuances. Some states, you don't need it. Other ones, if a general election is a good date for you and that's been successful, don't reinvent the wheel. If the thought process, though, is failure, and a lot of times I'll go in and analyze bonds that have failed, I'll look at those and say, what things do you think we could adjust to do a little different? We got about 4 minutes left, and I want to give you a chance. On that table on your way out I set some of my business cards there. I'm more than glad to have you email me, call me with any questions, with any information that you would like to have further. I know that 30 minutes is a quick time slot, but on the same token, I think we've covered a good amount of information to give you a glance that from A to Z is the approach you use to make bonds successful. Throwing them out, without that, you have less chance for success. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we'll actually put those in the link that we send out at the end of the week with the rest of the presentation. So Rich sent a few other resources that we can send out as well.
You bet. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I saw that you mentioned that it was inexpensive to do phone polling. And I was curious whether you did that in-house at your district, or did you hire a consultant to do that polling for you?
Perfect question. My recommendation is that we do a sample poll before every election. The 65 issues that have passed, every one of those we've done a poll. And as you know, you can do all kinds of polls nowadays. You can do a person-person poll, which doesn't really work because the mathematicians tell us that the training doesn't allow for validity. We can send it out in the mail and it doesn't get returned. We can do an electronic survey through Google or something else. We don't get a good return rate there either, and we never know who answers it. So we still do a telephone survey conducted by firms. The University of Idaho has researchers that conduct a telephone survey, and here's how we do it. We go down the voter registration list and do every 10th name, every 30th name to give us a valid population. It's a 3 to 5 minute survey that is done. The Freedom Foundation don't fight that because we'll ask them, how do you feel on this project from extremely agree to extremely disagree? So we give them the opportunity to say good, bad, or indifferent. And I say to the soups, is the projects that you have in mind approved by your patrons? And if he can't answer it, I say, let's try that poll. If we didn't get election polls, you guys all get called, so do I. They're testing the waters. I want to do the same thing there to test the waters if we possibly can and get a valid population of the registered voters. Great question. One more question, Michael?
You have time for one
Anyone
more?
have a last question for me? Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rich.